now turn our attention to a long-term survey on investment in 3 economies in particular. 2 of those were mentioned just now by Sharif: Kenya and Nigeria. There's also Ghana, which piques investor interests. Joining us now to discuss the latest survey on their growth prospects is Edward Cropley. Edward Cropley is from Reuters, and they're the people who conducted the survey. Ed, it's always great having you. So obviously we've just heard Sharif tell us that top 2 investment destinations, Nigeria and also Kenya. Interestingly, number 3, Zimbabwe, not Ghana.
Yeah, no, that indeed is a surprise to hear from Sharif. I mean, Zimbabwe, of course, is in sort of massive arrears to the IMF and World Bank and other multilateral lenders. So there is a chronic dollar shortage in the country, which is hampering any sort of broad-based economic growth, which is interesting to see, of course, why Finance Minister Beattie yesterday said they were having to bolster their budget with these extra IMF funds. But yeah, I mean, if you're an equity investor, Zimbabwe has always been an attractive stock market. It's a fairly diversified set of holdings, from beer companies to telecoms to mining companies, of course. And if Zimbabwe can get its sort of the political machinations sorted out, and there are, of course, huge question marks over the current government and what's going to happen with an election and a new constitution probably this year. If that is sorted out, and as I say, it's a big if, then the economy really should grow very fast.
But according to the Reuters survey, it's Ghana that's the star performer. Is it the oil story?
There is a big oil story in Ghana, obviously, although the recent fluctuations in the currency, and I say fluctuations, I mean in the last sort of 2 weeks, the currency has fallen sort of 7 or 8% against the dollar. There are various reasons behind this, one of which is maybe a lack of sort of a disappointment at the amount of oil revenues that are coming on shore. Although we've known for some time that output in the early months of production hasn't been quite what it should have been. Similarly, there have also been concerns about possibly the central bank not being sort of as interventionist in supplying dollars as it could be. But you know, the outlook is looking bright for Ghana as long as it can control what will be a large influx of petrodollars.
Let's talk about the first 2, though, because clearly there is convergence in this survey and that, Nigeria and Kenya. I mean, Nigeria, the usual suspect, 160 million people, it's a critical mass. There's a huge potential for the Nigerian middle class to drive retail, and that's really the trend that we're starting to see in Nigeria, is the growth of the non-oil sector. What else works in their favour?
Well, that's exactly it. The 2 big things everybody knows about Nigeria is it's the most populous nation in Africa, and it's also the biggest oil producer. But the interesting thing from all the economists that we spoke to as this part of our long-term polling is that it's the non-oil sector that's going to be driving the growth. That's the retailers, you know, the shopping malls that are going up in Lagos and Abuja and some of the other cities. It's the telecoms companies which are signing up new subscribers. You know, and some millions of people every month get mobile phone subscriptions in Nigeria. And of course, it's the banks, which are sort of putting the crisis of 2008 and 2009 behind them, thanks indeed to the very astute and rigorous intervention by the authorities from Abuja.
But how come the reality on the ground doesn't reflect that? We talk about these reforms, we talk about the stellar growth, and then you look at the performance of the Nigeria Stock Exchange, you look at inflows by way of government bonds, and investors are not flooding into Nigeria.
Well, it has to be said, I mean, I would take exception to some of the findings of the survey from the previous caller. If you take the long-term equity horizon from Africa, Nigeria's been a dog, Kenya's been a dog. You know, really in sort of local currency terms, you've got flat returns, and if you put them into dollar terms, where the currency is to depreciate against the dollar, then you've actually taken quite a hit over your five-year time horizon. Which, given that these economies are meant to be growing at 5, 6, 7% a year, you're thinking, well, where's this growth gone? And the challenge for investors is to translate this big macroeconomic growth into real returns that they can take home in dollars, and that is not easy still.
Nigeria in the headlines now for all the wrong reasons: security issues, Boko Haram, public protests over a fuel subsidy. So there is a sense that Nigeria's got a few teething problems this year.
Well, it's not teething problems, and these are major problems, and they represent challenges to the status quo. They also represent challenges to the government's reform efforts. They're very, very different in nature, of course. The potential of Nigeria is something that everybody harps on about, as you say, 150 million people or whatever. But the economy is staggeringly inefficient. I mean, the total generating capacity from the power stations is 3,000 megawatts. That compares to about 40,000 for South Africa. To get the economy going with better electricity supply, they need to completely overhaul the power sector. That's not going to be easy. There are a lot of vested interests at stake. And then you look, of course, at what's happening with the oil sector and the removal of fuel subsidies earlier this year. The President made a very, very bold move on January the 1st. I mean, you couldn't make a more explicit statement of intent. And unions are up in arms, the general public up in arms, violence and protests and strikes, and he backs down.
But I want to stay on my little metaphor of teething problems, because he's backed down on the fuel subsidy, but he's intent on continuing with deregulation. So, you know, he's removed the oil price from 141 to 97, but we're being told that gradually they're going to do this thing. They're going to reform the sector. So they see this as just an adjustment issue, not as a fundamental problem to the economy.
Sure, and it would be rude of me to say, to sort of, you know, try and second guess his words too much, but he's not the first Nigerian leader to embark upon a reform program, and he's certainly not the first Nigerian leader to find considerable public opposition to those efforts. He has considerable support, of course, from his finance minister, Okonjo-Iweala, and indeed the central bank, and indeed the foreign investment community, but the sign of sort of rowing back on the initial removal of those fuel subsidies is going to cause one or two alarm bells to ring.
Kenya, I'm surprised. This is a market that fell over 30% last year. It's a currency that's depreciated 25%. The issues in Europe persist, and there's a huge vulnerability because they export so much to Europe. The recovery of Kenya in the near term doesn't look particularly encouraging.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the poll of the economists that we spoke to is for economic growth of 5% this year and 6% for next year, which, as you say, is optimistic and eye-opening. I think it's maybe born of the fact that there's a perception that Kenya's almost got to hit the bottom. Certainly the currency hit the bottom in September last year. It fell 25% from January to September. The central bank finally woke up and went on a very, very aggressive series of policy tightening. Interest rates went up to 18%. The currency has reversed nearly all those losses, and so inflation, of course, is coming back into check. And there's a sign that, you know, they've got they're sort of, the worst is behind Kenya now, hopefully. But the other problem then, of course, is the political situation in Kenya. I mean, initially we were looking at an election in August this year, and that's been pushed back to 2013. For logistical reasons. That's the public reason. Although one senses that, you know, some of the machinations relating to the International Criminal Court might well have been in play there as well.
Okay, we've got to end this interview, but with the ICC, when you see the finance minister step down after that indictment, analysts are saying political maturity. Kenya's definitely on the right track.
We hope so. We hope so. He stepped down, but William Ruto, who's also been indicted and been ordered by the ICC to stand trial for crimes against humanity, has said that he's expressed, of course, professed his innocence and said he's still going to run for president. And there's lots of talk of both him and Uhuru Kenyatta forming a coalition to run against Odinga. And this is, we hope for maturity, but there's a lot of water to go under this bridge yet.
Right, Edward Cropley, thanks so much for joining us, talking to us about a frontier market survey conducted by Reuters.